All right, I think my mic might be working, but let's check it out. Mic check 1 2 1 2. Mic check 1 2 1 2. If anyone in the chat can hear me, just push 1. All right, I got a confirmation from JBA Mega Montana. Thank you for the confirmation and welcome back to the Black Brain Trust. This is episode 377, Pan-African Talk. Please hit the like button as you come in, share the video if possible, hit that notification bell so you get all the updates from the Black Brain Trust, including those posted on the community tab. There's a document in the description beneath the video. If you want to join the panel and engage in the discussion, there will be a link in the chat. When you click on the link, make sure you raise your hand or else no one will be able to see you to advance you to the panel. All right, let me drop the link. We are 15 minutes late as usual. All right, let me get to the first item on the docket. Try to speak through this real quick. All right, first item on the docket is from AlJazeera.com. Sudan launches its first ever satellite in partnership with China. Khartoum says the satellite, which was launched by China, will conduct research for military as well as civilian purposes. Sudan's first ever satellite to carry out research in military, economic, and space technology has been launched by China, the African country's governing council said. General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan, head of Sudan's Sovereign Council, announced on Tuesday the launch of the satellite at a meeting of his top security officials said held in the capital, Khartoum. The satellite aims to develop research in space technology, acquire data, as well as discover natural resources for the country's military needs, a statement issued by the council said. Xinhua, China's state news agency, reported that the Sudan remote sensing satellite, SRSS-1, was launched on Sunday from the northern Chinese province of Shanxi. Spokesman for the ruling body, Mohammed Al-Faqi Suleiman, told AFP news agency that in a few months, the satellite would be monitored from Sudan. China launched the satellite as it is a partner in this project, Al-Faqi said. Sudan, which is battling an economic crisis, has been involved in a national space program for decades, covering activities such as remote sensing and geoinformatics. In 2013, the then Sudanese government, led by President Omar al-Bashir, established in the Institute of Space Research and Aerospace as part of an overall plan to develop space technologies. Al-Bashir was removed by the army in April following the nationwide protest movement against his 30-year rule. The protests were triggered by an economic crisis led by acute shortage of foreign currency and high inflation. This is actually good news, right? They were able to develop a space program on their own. Why this is important is because they're taking an initiative on their own. Everything's organic for these African countries, or at least a lot of this technology that they're developing is indigenous. The Institute of Space Research and Aerospace, which is the name of the program, plans to develop more space technologies. So this is the direction that they're moving into, and why we need to pay attention to all the development that's happening on the continent. All right, let me Jump to the next item on the docket. Asiyada Muhammad, assalamu alaikum to you. So jump to this next item. Okay, this one is from ktpress.rw. Two Rwandans among finalists of Jack Ma's $1 million entrepreneurship award. It's a beautiful sister right there. Kevin Karapundu, co-founder and chief executive officer of Uri KNY, an African-inspired eco-friendly shoe brand, and Christelle Kwizera, founder of Water Access Rwanda, could next month walk away with huge packages after they were listed among the 10 finalists of Africa Netpreneur Prize Initiative Awards. The finalists were chosen from nearly 10,000 applicants from 50 African countries. The African Netpreneur Prize Initiative, ANPI, is a philanthropic initiative spearheaded by the Jack Ma Foundation, a charitable organization established in 2014 by Jack Ma, executive chairman of Alibaba Group. The organization aims at supporting and inspiring the next generation of African entrepreneurs across all sectors who are building a more sustainable and inclusive economy for the future of the continent. For the next 10 years, the ANPI will host the Africa Business Heroes Show, where 10 finalists will compete in a pitch competition to win a share of $1 million in grant money. After months of judging and deliberation, the finalists were shortlisted and will go on to pitch their business directly to four finale judges: Jack Ma, founder of Alibaba Group, and Jack Ma Foundation, Steve Masayua, and I'm not going to read the rest of them. The winners will receive a share of $1 million grant prize pool. The Jack Ma Foundation will host a full day of Africa Netpreneur Summit, an invitation-only conference where African and global entrepreneurs, investors, educators, and leaders will convene to discuss how to best enable entrepreneurship and the digital economy across the continent. Guest speakers at the conference will include Ban Ki-moon, former UN Secretary General and co-chair of the Ban Ki-moon Center for Global Citizens. We launched the Africa Netpreneur Prize Initiative to identify top entrepreneurs from across the continent, not only to reward them, but to inspire a whole new generation of potential game changers for Africa. I have been inspired by the entrepreneurs I met in Africa, many of whom are dealing with the same challenges we faced when we started Alibaba years ago, said Jack Ma. I truly believe the potential of Africa's business heroes is limitless, Ma added. The award ceremony and the entrepreneurship conference will take place in Accra, Ghana on the 16th of November 2019. So this happened last week. Speaking to KT Press with excitement, Kevin Karapundu said, "It is a great achievement to have been nominated among the finalists. This was a long journey. We applied just like thousands of other entrepreneurs, tens of thousands. So being shortlisted is a big achievement," Karapundu said. She added that in case the award goes to her or not, being selected among the 10 finalists is a start of a long journey to take her company further. So being select is very important. You know, no pun intended. Again, just a quick look at this beautiful sister right here. Definitely on the radar of a lot of brothers, or she should be. Yeah, entrepreneurship on the continent, man, is big, usually because it's proprietary to their environment. And because it's proprietary to their environment, there's a lot of innovative ideas that's coming out of all these entrepreneurs. And I think what's happening here is they are paying attention to their environment and trying to find solutions to their problems. Um, I think what happens in the United States, you don't have the same initiative being rewarded to people in predominantly Black areas. And because of that, nothing really gets done. I think a lot of that needs to change, and we could probably learn a lot from these people on the continent. All right, let me jump to the next article. All right, this next one's from AlJazeera.com. Kagame's Rwanda is still Africa's most inspiring success story. I'm not going to read this whole thing, but I will read the first 3 paragraphs. When Paul Kagame became Rwanda's president in 2000, he inherited a country that had been torn apart by genocide. To rebuild it, he had to rely on mostly uneducated guerrilla fighters and a handful of ill-trained cadres. Even the most optimistic of analysts doubted his chances. But 19 years later, the country is stable and prosperous, unified, and in large part reconciled. Social services such as education, healthcare, housing, and livestock are provided to the needy with no distinction of ethnicity or region of origin, 2 forms of discrimination that characterized the governments leading up to the genocide against the Tutsi, and which Kagame, as a leader of the Rwandan Patriotic Front, RPF, brought to an end. Outside of Africa, however, Kagame raises mixed feelings with human rights groups, classifying him as an authoritarian leader who curtails press and political freedoms and presides over an undemocratic nation whose constitution he changed to remain president beyond his legal term. While justified, the critics made one mistake to imply that these freedoms were already existent in Rwanda and Kagame simply took them away. They weren't. Kagame and Rwandans have been working to establish them in the country that has never had them. Born in southern Rwanda in 1957, Kagame's parents fled the country during the anti-Tutsi programs when he was 2 years old. He was raised in Rwandan communities in refugee camps in Uganda, where he observed and was a victim to the recurrent oppression he visited upon his people. He later joined the Ugandan guerrilla movement, the National Resistance Army, that installed Yoweri Museveni as president of Uganda. When he returned to Rwanda as a leader of the RPF, the country's coffers had been looted and estimated 800,000 Tutsis and moderate Hutus had been killed. The survivors were traumatized, the killers fearful of retribution, and the returnees destitute. Rwanda was a failed state by any measure. 25 years after the genocide, the wounds of the slowly healing survivors still see Kagame as a guarantor of their existence. He pardoned the perpetrators and set the country on a journey to unity and reconciliation. Kagame has been tough in his style of governance and stringent on corruption, populism, and divisive speech. Politicians with hate-charged rhetoric have consistently faced harsh sentences and largely prison terms and lengthy prison terms. Speech is regulated to prohibit ethnic prejudice, while democracy was trimmed and tailored to the peculiar predicament facing the Rwandan people. This was necessary to install a new government mentality. A new unified country had somehow to be built with the same people, killers and their victims, living side by side with a unity of purpose, the betterment of their village, the district, their country. In this endeavor, Kagame was acting with people's mandate and within the ambits of the Rwandan Constitution. His mission as Rwandan leader is first and foremost to protect the Rwandan people from genocide by any means necessary. This mission, which is not sufficiently understood by the Western world, will probably also be passed on to his successors for 2 or 3 generations to come. International analysis and champions of democracy have not embraced Kagame's atypical approach, often assessing Rwandan politics through a Western lens and thus missing the complexities of governing post-genocide. As a result, they may have missed what is arguably the most edifying case study in national transformation for the last 25 years. I'm not sure if anybody even heard me. I know Mega Montana said he heard me, but it looks like my volume might have been off. So I'm not sure if anybody's been hearing me. Oh, well, if they say they can't hear me, they will say something in the chat. This from a Rwandan is a human rights in practice, and it explains why. In 2015, there were more than 60% of the voters signed a petition calling for a constitutional changes to allow Kagame to stand for election after his term ended in 2017. Some outsiders seem concerned that Kagame has not groomed a successor. And although there are no crown princes in Rwanda, the president has chosen to groom thousands of young men and young women in particular to lead the country into the future. The average age of his cabinet is 40. Women make up 50% of the cabinet, 61.5% of the parliament, and 50% of the Supreme Court judges. In 2018, Kagame chaired the African Union, championing potentially game-changing initiatives such as Continental Free Trade Area, which was signed in the Rwandan capital, Kigali. African youth are enthusiastic about Kagame. It is not uncommon to see calls on social media for Kagame to be borrowed as president of their respective countries, even if just for a few months to fix things. The beauty of Africa is that every 25 years, the population renews itself. Over 70% of the Rwandan population is what we call Kagame generation, empowered, ambitious young people free from the prejudices that animated their parents. Of course, major challenges remain. In 2017, the unemployment rate was 16.7%, and the youth unemployment rate 21%. But Kagame is battling on the country's mice, meetings, incentives, conferences, and exhibitions, strategy, and information communications technology, ICT, and off-farm employment opportunity to absorb the 250,000 young people who enter the job market each year. The book makers are still out, but with Rwanda's economy expanded by 8.6% in 2018, the country rated the second best place to do business in Africa. And it having soared up the human development index, the indicators are looking promising. You know, a lot of times, this is actually a good article. A lot of times they'll talk about, you know, African leaders being dictators and, you know, no democracy. Well, guess what? There's no democracy in Saudi Arabia, but nobody seems to have a problem with that. No one has a problem with, you know, dictators running Saudi Arabia or Bahrain, but they seem to have a problem with that in Africa. I always find that interesting. They're always talking about dictators this and dictators that on the continent. They installed dictators in Latin America themselves. All right, let me get to this next article real quick. Fly through these articles, man, then we can just open it up for discussion. This one is from face-to-faceafrica.com. Top 5 African languages you must learn if you're thinking of doing business in Africa. Africa is the second largest continent of the world, and it is home to approximately 1/3 of the world's languages, according to Harvard. It has numerous linguistic and ethnic groups. Many languages in Africa belong to either the Afro-Asiatic or Niger-Congo family of languages. African languages are awesome. They are invaluable for language enthusiasts, professionals in the business world, and anyone who would visit the continent someday for whatever reason. If you're working across Africa, you will need to communicate with a number of people, and these African languages will definitely aid your trade. If you are looking to have and run a smooth business in Africa, you should really be eager to learn these great languages. All right, interesting picture here. As a business person, your ability to speak Swahili can lead you and could lead you good business deals, and comparatively, it's a more it's a bit more efficient and easy to learn and many other tribal languages of East and Central Africa. In the Swahili language, things are written as they are pronounced. It's interesting. It's kind of like in Russian. There are an estimated 100 million people or more who speak Swahili. It is a Bantu language believed to have originated from Arabs and Persians who moved to the East African coast. Swahili is official and national language to Tanzanians, Kenyans, and most recently Ugandans. Other nations like Rwanda, Burundi, Southern Somalia, Ethiopia, Sudan, and Northern Mozambique and Comoros Islands also speak Swahili. Interesting. Oromo. Under the military regime, the writing of Oromo in any script was forbidden between 1974 and 1991. But today, to do business in some parts of Africa, your ability to speak the language will really aid your transactions. The Oromo language is acoustic language spoken by more than 50 million people in Ethiopia, Kenya, Somalia, and Egypt. And it is the third largest language in Africa, according to a report by Harvard. The language is also spoken by people outside of Africa in the United States, Australia, Canada, and different Europe cities. People are reportedly speaking, and societies are teaching their kids and foreigners how to communicate in Afan Oromo. Interesting. What a beautiful little melanated girl. Um, Amharic. Africa is expanding with new infrastructure and business opportunities. If you learn Amharic, you can rub elbows in Ethiopia with many business-minded persons and government officials. Amharic is the official language of Ethiopia with an estimated 33.4 million speakers. It is the second most spoken Semitic language in the world. According to history, the language dates back to the first millennium BC, the days of King Solomon and Queen of Sheba. There's a lot of Queen of Shebas in the manosphere who proclaim to be. They are not. The language is written in a slightly modified version of alphabets with over 30 different characters. Amharic is one of the main languages of Ethiopia, with the second being Oromo. Interesting. When you say salam, it means hello. So salam to my people. I think I might be butchering this, but I think this is pronounced Ausa. You can actually learn Ausa very quickly and easily. It is spoken mainly in northern Nigeria, Niger, Benin, Burkina Faso, Cameroon, Central African Republic, Chad, Congo, and Eritrea, Germany, Ghana, Sudan, Togo, and much of North Africa. Ausa is one of the one of Nigeria's official languages and one of the most spoken Chadic languages of the continent, with over 40 million speakers as both native and second language. All right. This last one is Yoruba. One of the easiest African languages to learn is Yoruba. Most of the people who speak Yoruba live in Nigeria, Benin, and Togo. However, there are also a number of speakers in other countries. Yoruba is one of the many African languages that you are most likely to hear people speak in the buses and the underground trains in US and UK. Yoruba is one of the West African most spoken languages, with over 40 million people in the world estimated to speak Yoruba as a first language. It is the mother tongue of Yoruba people in Nigeria and has over 15 dialects, including Awori, Ijisa, Ije, and To say hello in Yoruba, one says bawo. Interesting. All right, next item on the docket is from HaitianTimes.com. Serving the Haitian community through truth, fairness, and transparency. At first, they scoffed at our founder's vision. When they couldn't kill the dream, they questioned whether this could be realized. When they saw he created a full-fledged operation, they sowed seeds of doubt within the community, attempted to attack his integrity and intentions. When their bullying and attempts of intimidation failed, they finally came to accept, and for many, respect the contribution an institution like Haitian Times has to a community. Throughout it all, our founder remained steadfast in maintaining the integrity of Haitian Times, turning a blind eye to manipulation tactics and outright attempts to infect the paper through corruption. However, he made sure the Haitian Times operated outside that sphere. It is with the same spirit that I took on this role as publisher. In the weeks leading to our anniversary, I reflected on what he built and how he was able to maintain the paper's longevity. The answer was simple. He stayed above the fray. While this may seem simple enough, it's not. Everything is great and in potential conflict of interest with when a community institution is run by those actually in the community, because people misinterpret its accessibility with familiarity. Very good point. I reflected on the expectations that would be placed on me from those with their own agendas and how that stacked up against what our readers demand from us. They will flatter you. They will attempt to bully, intimidate, and manipulate you. He said during our anniversary reception, stay above the muck and remember your only duty is to truth, fairness, and transparency. Regardless of a proximity to the community and stakeholders on the ground, Haitian Times is now or never will be a simple mouthpiece, because my priority is depending in promoting the interests of our community and not the narrow interests of a few. Trumpian attacks against the press and a "you're with us" or "against us" attitude is dangerous to the growth of the community and democracy as a whole. I think this speaks volumes about the Black Brain Trust. We share the same sentiments. a lot of what's said in this article, 99%, is aligned with the principles of the Black Brain Trust. So definitely worth the read for me. Oh, come on. All right, let me see what happens when I do this. All right, this one is from the NewYorkTimes.com. In Georgetown's $400,000 a year plan to aid slave descendants enough. All right, this one's behind the paywall. University officials described the decision as one step in a dialogue with the descendants who are seeking $1 billion. Joining a wave of American institutions moving to offer a measure of restitution for their ties to slavery, Georgetown University announced on Tuesday that it would raise about $400,000 a year to benefit the descendants of the 272 enslaved people who were sold to help keep the college afloat nearly 2 centuries ago, officials said. This is interesting because, you know, a lot of people who claim these hashtags never really seem to go over these articles, at least from what I've seen. Maybe outside of the those other two over on that other channel. But what I'll say here is that this is actually a very big step in the right direction. I wonder though, where are the people who are related to these descendants? Who are these descendants of the slaves? Who are they, and where and why haven't they come forward? At least I haven't seen anything concrete as of yet. But I like to see what they do with the, you know, with the compensation, basically. All right, let me get to this next article. The return of Gaddafi. Can his son take Libya out of hell? This one's from face-to-faceafrica.com. 6 years after he was arrested and imprisoned by a militia group in the town of Zintan, Saif al-Assam Gaddafi, the son of the former Libyan president Colonel Muammar Gaddafi, promises to reestablish peace and stability in war-torn Libya. Saif, who was released from prison in June, has vowed to lead a military onslaught against terror groups operating in the Libyan capital, Tripoli, and pundits say he stands a chance to win the presidential poll if it takes place next year, as earlier suggested. As the second son of the celebrated Libyan leader and the apparent heir of his father's regime, Saif still enjoys a significant amount of support from Libyans, especially those who were loyal to his father. Saif was arrested in 2011 during the infamous Arab Spring that brought an end to Muammar Gaddafi's 42-year reign. He was accused of murdering protesters in Tripoli as his father tried to desperately cling to power. Saif now claims to have gathered enough fighters to help him recapture Tripoli, as he recently did in the coastal town of Sabratha. In a statement issued by his spokesman, Saif said he committed to defending the Libyan territory and even die for it as a martyr as if he has to. The forces who brought in Sabratha against ISIS, the gangs of illegal immigrants and the oil smuggling mafias, were mainly members of the tribes who support Saif al-Islam and those who were part of the former Libyan army, also loyal to Saif Gaddafi. Saif's spokesman was recently quoted by The Guardian. Some local observers are optimistic that Saif, a graduate of the London School of Economics, might benefit politically from the current general political weariness and the longing for the relative peace and stability enjoyed during his father's regime. But some of the critics say he is taking credit for military actions taken by others, given that most of the recent battles have been between ethnic groups fighting to maintain control over smuggling routes. Moreover, most of Gaddafi loyalists, including Wasfihana tribal fighters, have been routed out of Tripoli by rival militias, especially their former allies from Zatan, who are against Wasfihana's attempts to extort money from motorists at roadblocks. Although the UN envoy seeking to restore peace in Libya wants the country to hold an election in 2018, experts say an election is impossible in the existing environment of war and uncertainty. I think that might be we got going 11 on the panel from the Big Apple.
Hey, what's going on, Mike?
I'm chilling, fam. I'm chilling, man. With Gaddafi's son Saif coming out of jail and trying to restore order, man, I think there might be a lot of interesting prospects on the table turning on the continent. You got Paul Kagame in Rwanda. You got the rise of Kenya. You got Gaddafi's son coming onto the scene, trying to restore order. There's a lot of busyness going on the continent, man, in terms of a growth and prosperity standpoint.
I totally agree. I think Gaddafi's son, he was there, literally with his dad at the feet of power there. Kind of saw how things were run, understood where his father was going, and I believe, quite frankly, a lot of first of all, we know some of the economic policies when he was talking about. You and I have spoken on this before, but we're aware of that currency that they were trying to develop for Africa, a Pan-African currency, if you will. That was really primarily his idea. So his economic views in Africa are right in line where I think Africa actually has to go. The question of it is as a developing continent, whether the United States and the powers that be here would want to see him, gain power there. Again, that's another question. Mm-hmm. But I certainly think, from a leadership perspective, can he potentially bring some problems, down and maybe possibly potentially unite the country? It's a possibility. I think his prospects there are good. Mm-hmm. Depending on how people see some of his policy views as far as really making his nation a lot stronger. He's got a strong base to stand on. So I think it's not a bad move for them, for him to make. I think it'd be a very good move for Libya to kind of unite around one leader and one really kind of unified government, and really start to enact some things that I think would work in their best interest, as far from some of the madness that's going on right now, and take advantage of a lot of the, like you just mentioned, Rwanda and so forth, where these countries are coming online. Mm-hmm. With respect to the technological age. Some countries are now being very well run, that are moving away from some of this massive corruption. Mm-hmm. And really come in and play a very strong economic and political but really come into the economics of the continent. I think Libya could be a tremendous leader there. I mean, they were a very strong country before the debacles and stuff that have happened there. But I think he can do very well. I think he could potentially be a very strong leader there, depending if he can, get the proper political and some of the economic forces behind him. I think he could do well. That's my take. I'm sure there'll be those who'll have some different views, but that's my view.
We got Ty City on the line, man, in his Cybertruck. What's going on?
What's up, City? What's up, baby?
Hey, Nagoon, I'm aligned with you, Nagoon. I think that he can do it because his father was respected. You know what I'm saying? And I think that the death of his father signaled, you know what I'm saying, the bricks to actually reinforce the unity to make something happen. You know what I'm saying? I think this would be great, man. And I think he's the perfect person to do it.
A lot of people don't know that the Chinese had a lot of contracts with Libya for oil and water excavation. I think, and I may be wrong on this, but the Chinese were the ones who helped discover water beneath the desert and pump it out into Libya for irrigation purposes of crops and agriculture. And actually put water into areas that never had it before. And because of that, I think what's happening here is that the Chinese had contracts in exchange for Libya's oil. Libya had the most amount of barrels pumped per day of oil. I think they had something like 3 million barrels a day, which is the most on the continent. Nigeria is probably close to second with I think 1.7 million barrels or something to that effect. And I think Angola has something like 900,000 barrels a day or something to that effect.
Yeah, didn't they hit lithium too, if I'm not mistaken? Didn't they find some lithium out there?
They may have found it. I don't know. That region is not really sparse with lithium. That's usually in the sub-Saharan. I know Zimbabwe has a lot of lithium, and so does Nigeria, and they're very close to each other within a few miles. So lithium seems to be very abundant in the sub-Saharan, not so much in the north.
Yeah, but I would like to see. I'm gonna keep an eye out on this because I want to see how this go down.
Yeah, his son's no idiot, man. He has a PhD in economics, man.
No, I think his son is very well suited to handle this.
Yeah. No, he's no fool.
That is good news, man. I'm glad to hear this.
All right, let me jump to this next video from TRT World. Hopefully you don't get flagged for this. All right, Brazil Black communities space launch center deal may hurt traditional communities. So these are the descendants of slaves from the African slave trade. For those of you who don't understand that there are a lot of melanated people down in Brazil, probably more so than the United States. Would you agree, Nicole?
Well, hold on a second. I can tell you exactly. You have more Black people in Brazil than you have anywhere in the Western Hemisphere, including, the islands and, the Americas combined. They're the only place that has more Black people is Nigeria. So I just want to let you know that, you have more Black people that speak Portuguese than Spanish, French, and English combined in the Western Hemisphere. Just to put a little perspective on really what's going on there. And that's why I say, if you're Black and you want to travel around, you should know some Portuguese. But anyway.
You can see how melanated she is. A lot of people want to say, oh, we shouldn't care about those people, but what you don't realize is this is what happened after slavery was over. They did not get their 40 acres and a mule.
No, they did not. They didn't get it, and we're denied it. And the thing about it was they came down on a lot of Black people because they felt that Black people who had been taken into slavery from West Africa broke away from the Portuguese colonies and formed their own kind of maroon, or Colombo, they call them, societies that were not under Portuguese rule and were run more like some small West African countries. You can go in some of these areas where some of the wedding rites and ceremonies are as pure as they were from Africa.
Mm-hmm.
And they're even more pure there than they are in Africa today. That's how closely they've kept to them. And I've been through some of these areas. But anyway, you will see Africans have a very, very strong pride there. They consider themselves melanated African, Black African people who are Brazilian, Black Afro-Brasileiros, and they have a tremendous pride about them. A lot of people do not know about that. And that's one of the reasons why they don't really want you going down there. They don't want Black people here in the United States linking up politically with other Blacks on the, on the continent below us and other areas, because the power base would be in so many respects too strong. You would shake the very base of the Western world. That's what the fear of the slave revolts and all these kind of things were. They saw what happened in Haiti and so forth. They've been consistently trying to stop this kind of thing for the last 400 years. You have to understand what's really going on. That's why when we call people shines and everything else like that, they don't really understand where we're coming from, but they don't want you linking up. You link up, the Afro-Americans come down and Afro-Brasileiras, and they start talking, and you start working, you start working together, you got a problem. So what do? They inject the color issue. So they try a color scheme that has been very successful. The lighter skin, dark skin, you get all this stuff going on. So they play that to the hilt. You have that certainly in Brazil. You have that all throughout the Caribbean islands. You have that all throughout South America. And that's the game that they play for you to run behind the mayonnaise. When the mayonnaise really is, it ain't shit. But at the end of the day, you put more value in it because somebody else has told you to, when really you have all the value. That's why you were there. So it's a mind game that we have still yet to break through, and it still runs very powerfully here in these United States as well, unfortunately.
And to add additionally, hold up, Ty City. And to add additionally, Lula and Dilma Rousseff were responsible for helping these melanated people down there, the descendants of the slaves, to get access to the land, which is what this video is talking about. That the United
Mike, let's point Lula. He was one of the few presidents who said, yes, I am this, I'm that, but I do have African blood in me as well. He spoke on this. You have others who have spoken on this, where I admit I took, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu down there for a whole year, trained with Euler Gracie and these guys. And, when, old man Gracie was talking about, well, our people are from Scotland. And he had people walk around them as dark as me. I mean, this is some of the fuckery going on with how these people think. So, yes, Lula claimed that. Lula knew he had Black blood. All of them do. And they played to it. And he bought many millions of people out of slavery. Not out of slavery, out of poverty in Brazil. And that's what they're trying to turn back the clock on that right now. But anyway, Mike, go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I was just going to say that the land that they're talking about in the article, with like you said, Lula and Rousseff helped cultivate rights to the land for those people. Now, what the United States is trying to do is remove those people from the land so that they can have access to it for their own colonialist agenda. They're doing the same thing in Bolivia. They're doing the same thing in Venezuela.
Very much, very true.
They're doing the same thing in Ecuador, in many of the other Latin American places that a lot of ADOS, a lot of your hashtags keep ignoring and thinking that doesn't matter. And in reality, it does matter. These people are sitting on trillions of dollars of wealth that they can't get out of the ground because they are at war with these oppressive powers. They don't really realize this.
Yeah, I mean, no, you're hitting right in the head. I mean, it's just, it comes down to a little bit more of education. I think there's one brother, Mystic Jedi, said, yes, sir, Nagone, but they won't be able to stop it from happening. Well, you know, they can't stop it from happening. They stopped a lot from happening before. The name of the game is just to get together politically. And there's a rising consciousness in these areas of which we need to be playing a role in. We're too caught up into the parochial local mindset of what's going on here. Is why we've had some of the slowdown and some of the turning back of the clock here in this country, because we have not played it well internationally. And the other international people want you. When you go down to Brazil, you go to Bahia and these places, they want you there. You, people don't understand this because we don't travel around. We don't get into a multilingual type of mindset, which is a tremendous power for us. But we're going to have to work this out over the next 100 years, because if we don't, it's over. But we're going to have to work this out. We have many Black people here on both of these continents, especially South America, and that's your power base. It's just too bad we're not fully seeing this yet. But the internet is making this world a little bit smaller. I'm just going to leave it at that. I mean, you guys can talk more into it, because I've got some fairly radical views about some of this. But but anyway, go ahead.
I said he was trying to talk.
Go ahead,
Nah, what Nagone was saying, you know what I'm saying, how we all connected through this slave trade, man. And I'm on a panel arguing with this guy who said that there were no slave ships and that we were here and that there was no need to even bring Africans here. And I'm arguing with this dude, and I'm dropping the links to where they're actually finding these sunken slave ships, you know what I'm saying, even up to April of this year, you know what I'm saying? And I'm like, wow, man, we really are getting disconnected from each other.
Yeah, well, I mean, how did Christopher Columbus find his way here? He sure as shit didn't have TomTom or Google Maps.
Well, that's why I asked him, why are there trading posts on all of these coastlines? Like, nobody, you know what I'm saying? They didn't take an airplane. The
Europeans acknowledge the slave trade. Why won't these guys?
Well, that's what I'm saying. But to go with Nagone saying, when Nagone saying is, we are connected.
Yeah.
Like
critically connected.
Like we hear, and this dude telling me that the white man told me that there was a slave trade. I'm like, are you serious?
Was his name ABO by any chance?
Nah. You know what? I can't even remember his name, but I'm gonna drop his name though.
Yeah. I know Nagone has I mean, we can open up a whole entire live stream just on Nagone's thoughts on Latin America and melanated people and the relationship down there. He spent time down there, and he has a vast insight as to what goes on and what his initiative would be if he was in power, if he had the power to do so. So,
yeah, I mean, there's a lot. I mean, we could take over. Technically, you could literally take that country over.
Yeah.
If you, you could literally take it over. You're on the land. You could literally almost take that country over. You could, if you wanted to. You could. That's a problem. The only problem is that you have, some of the issues that we have here. You have some very strong African consciousness, but you have a lot of Africans in Rio and these other areas walking around, loving the mayonnaise and trying to be like it when they're moving away from its power, understanding that they're holding all the wealth and they're not holding the wealth where they should be, ready to take the wealth. They're sitting there and they're sitting there like in all these favelas, sitting around literally ringing the city, ring around the city with all these favelas with melanated people sitting in there who could literally roll down and almost take the town over, take the place over. And what Rio was done is they created certain police forces, to literally act as terrorists, state-sponsored terrorist groups that run through there and do certain kind of things to try to keep people terrified and afraid, and keep people uneducated, keep people with poor health to a large extent, they've been running a fairly savage game. They're very savage. So, but we could potentially, if we all work together, we could all work together and stop a lot of this, nationally and internationally. We could. I know a lot of us don't understand that, but that's our power. That's what they don't want you to do. That's what they don't want you to do. They built their wealth on you, brought you all around, saw what happened in Haiti, and said, "Hold on one second. We got the wolf by the ear. The wolf's all around us. What are we gonna do?" So they played a big psychological game on us.
Yeah.
Big psychological game.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there's so much rich, rich history down there, man. And I wish, at some point in the next 10 years, I'm going to take a trip down there, man, just to see the people on the ground before I leave this earth, because much needed.
I believe the burning of their libraries that just happened. About people may not be aware of what is going on down there over the last year, but they've had some terrible fires on some of their libraries that they got lit up, and how they got lit up was very suspicious fires, and I believe a lot of that was because of your African history that was there. You had some people, which I think is concomitant exactly with the type of government that is coming. That's very right wing, very white leaning, if you will. And I think a lot of history was burnt up because of that, because they don't want a lot of the left being educated as to what your real history was. So there's stuff that was lost that's unbelievable amount of history that we were involved in that country. So I don't look at Black Brazilians as much different than myself, except, one speaks Portuguese and one speaks English. And I think every Afro-American should know some level of Spanish or should be fairly fluent in Portuguese, because in this hemisphere, that's who speaks. Black people speak more Portuguese than English, Spanish, and French combined.
Bro, that's
it's a fact. I mean, you don't know that because most people have not been taught this. They don't see it, but that's reality.
That's some straight up Hitler shit, dog.
Hey, as they say in Portuguese, realidade. Realidade. Sim, amigo.
Yeah,
truth.
Yeah, let me get to this next article from Quartz.com. Britain still fails to acknowledge its legacy of slavery. Memorializing its victims would be a start. Oh, this is behind the wall, damn. The sound of water flowing from the fountain that now stands towering in Tate Modern's turbine hall creates a calming softness in contrast to the cold, hard concrete floor on which I sit, trying to take in these 13-meter tall monument before me. The sculpture is both calming and distressing, presenting painful histories of the Black Atlantic slave trade in the delightful family-friendly setting of a public art museum. The characters of Venus, the captain, and Queen Vicky stand or sit around the monument's plinth. A mother directs her young sons gaze up to the water gently pouring down from above them. She does not point to the trunk of a tree planted on the side of a monument where these characters do not rest. It is not so pretty, not so easy to delight in. It is a tree without life, no branches, no leaves, only most ghostly bodies hanging from an empty noose. I wish they would have put this on a public display without the wall, because I would like to understand what Britain's reluctance is to doing it outside of racism. They probably are very much afraid of giving back art, not just giving back artifacts, but to actually compensate these people.
Hello?
Hey, what's going on, dude?
Well, yeah, it's like here in Dallas, right? They're having this thing about removing these Confederate monuments, and I think this is how I actually lost my Facebook page, because I was telling people not to protest, to let them leave the Confederate monuments up, because we have an issue where they're now putting in the school books that the slaves were sharecroppers and helpers and shit like that.
Oh, and writing history on purpose, to distort it. But what I'm saying, I think when they talked about removing the statues, that was only the headline. The idea was to put them inside of a museum in the same way that there is a slave, a museum of slavery in Washington, D.C. So I think that's what they wanted to do. The problem is that the Confederate people, the mayonnaise people, did not want to remove them at all. They actually want to uphold them. Realistically, they should be considered terrorists, but they don't want to talk about that.
Yeah, but I think that they get to take, see what they was going to do here in Dallas. Oh, there's some noise going on.
Yeah, I muted him.
Okay, so here in Dallas, they wanted to put them down in some basement. They wasn't going to put it in a museum or something.
Well, the sons of the Confederates or those who have ancestry linked to the Confederate should be the ones to fund their own museum. That's right. That's the proper way to actually go about it, right? Because Black people had to raise money for the Museum of Slavery, right? So that was already paid for. But these other guys, they don't want to actually pay for anything. They just want to leave it out there.
But see, Mike, here in Texas, especially in the DFW area, almost every high school and middle school is named after a slave owner. And people take their children to these schools all the time. And it's right there in broad daylight. People don't even do the simplest of research. And I feel like, man, all this stuff, who knows what this going to look like 200 years from now. They could easily just say, make up whatever narrative that they wanted to make because they took everything down.
Yeah, I mean, you don't see this in Germany, right? They don't uphold the National Party or the Nazis in that regard. I mean, you still have remnants of memorabilia and things like that, but they don't uphold it, right? And I mean, it's actually a pretty embarrassing part of history for Germany, right? That's very still recent, burning in their memory, because they still pay reparations to certain other countries that were affected, disproportionately affected and impacted by Hitler's army. So they can't really escape it. But in the South, in America, man, they'll rewrite history over and over again until you can't really understand what actually happened. They're very much involved, not involved, but the cultivators of subversion. So
yeah, and you know what? A friend of mine, he collects like relics and stuff from slavery, and he's linked up with this guy who does estate sales. And a lot of these white people, they have like shackles and old things that was handed down to them, like in these estate sales. He got all kind of stuff.
Yeah, probably has some knuckles and stuff too.
Yeah, man, it's all kind of like weird stuff, bro. That he got like his own little collection. It's like a private collection, but yeah, every time people come across stuff, they call him and they ask him if he want it, and he buys these things.
Yeah, because that should be placed into a museum and not on eBay or some offer up site trying to get a profit off it. I think that the United States government should actually reclaim all of that stuff and put it right into the museum.
Yeah, it's eerie, man. Some of that stuff is just too, like, it's eerie, man. They bring it home to you.
Hello?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Oh yeah, what's up? I apologize. I just want to make sure he's done saying something. I don't want to interrupt.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Well, I don't know. I think my point of it with history, I think.
I'm gonna call back, man. I'm gonna just listen in, bro. I'm out.
All right.
Yeah, I think my point with everything you're saying, I concur with a lot of it. I just think that the hard part is they don't tell like the accurate history of what people are going through or what happened. So it's like kind of like a fog to most people. People don't want to know how brutal it was because there's like, obviously like they tell history a certain way. They don't want to cause like, insurgency or riots, because the more people learn, the more how horrible it was. So it's kind of like that mentality. But it's another part of it I feel is more kind of like that's the way it always kind of has been. People always, the victors, tell the narrative. The one thing I always say is like, I think Americans kind of you spend too much time on slavery and not looking at the history of African descended people beyond slavery. And that's why I think the issue is like, yeah, there was slavery, but other groups in America came through just as not as horrible, but in the same realm of lower rung. Like Italians, Irish, they couldn't sit in places. There were dogs. Italians were getting lynched and hung in the South, in Louisiana.
Labor did not build the country.
No, I'm not debating that. Everything you're saying, I completely concur.
Mm-hmm. I just want to say something about Italians. When Italians first came here to this country, many of them were perceived as another race of black people.
Yeah, because it's true.
But how they tried to separate themselves is many of them who came over here very early became, like the Greeks, slave catchers, slave chasers. So it's a part of it's a part of history. It's a part of history you have to understand. I'm just saying.
Yeah, I understand that. I think
that's a part of the reality of what went on. Their job was to separate themselves from you. Okay, and in fact, even today, some of the most racist neighborhoods you ever go into are all Italian and that kind of stuff.
I'll give you this.
But the reality is that they were perceived as blacks when they first came over. And how they separated themselves was to come after you and do the worst.
Okay, let me ask you a question though. Why are they perceived as being black?
Because many of the Sicilians who came here looked black. Yeah, they looked black.
They were melanated. They were pretty.
Many of them looked black.
Why did they look black?
Say it again.
Why did they look black?
Because many of them had black blood in them.
African blood, right?
Okay, Moorish. I mean, the Moors were there for 700 years.
Exactly.
Sicily was invaded by many, but at the end of the day, that African essence was there. That's there, but that doesn't make them black people, though. You understand what I'm saying?
Okay, the thing I think people misconstrue in America is the terms American Jews is very confusing to people. So you gotta look at it this way. Like, I consider African American someone that's like 80% black, 10-15% white, 5% native. That's what African American is to me, right? When I see one. And there's variations, there's people that are very light, dark, you know what I mean? But it's a variation, right? The problem is when you use the term black, which is a color, right? It confuses people because people go, well, you have black skin or whatever. So people misconstrue a black American with like a Nigerian or Ghanaian or a Moroccan. And that's confusion. So when people are Dominican say, I'm not black, they're not saying they're not African descended. They're saying I'm Dominican or I'm Haitian or whatever it is, right?
Well, many people use those declinations to stay away from being castigated as even a black person, because what carries blackness means that you will be, how would I say, discriminated against mostly so heavily. So that's why these people took such harsh terms. Even the Mexicans were fighting. Even the Mexicans were fighting to be considered whites and looked upon as whites, even though they weren't. And I wanted to say this too. Mexico had a black president, Galvez, over 100 years ago, long before Barack Obama. So they've had black, but they've been fighting to be considered whites here in this country.
Okay, let me say something to you.
So it's just not your color per se. It's how they mark your people and who's going to be at the top of the society, who's not. So that's a big issue that a lot of people are fighting against.
Okay, I'll agree with you, but I'll clarify those two things you said to add on to it. Okay, so people always forget this, but they don't. Mexican people try to forget, but the Spanish was freed by a black guy, mulatto, right? The original first, they went against the Californios and all that stuff, and they went against Spaniards. That was led by a mulatto, free person of a Spanish dad and a black mother, free whatever. They led that. That's their first president ever in the history of Mexico, right? Like, that was what it was. Like, why do you think Mexico from the get-go was against slavery way before America was? If you could cross over to Mexico back in the day when they had slavery, you were free because Mexico didn't run that way. Neither did all the rest of Europe and all other places at that time, right? the one thing I think people don't really understand when it comes to history is most people in America, unfortunately, like aren't very educated about history, and they try to conflate different groups together. It's kind of like if you ever, I don't know, met like a Saudi, and you're telling a Saudi the same as a Pakistani, they'd punch you in the face. You tell a German, they're the same as a Dutch person, you get in a fight. And a Dutch.
So I'm trying to get your major point.
Here's my point. What I'm trying to say to you is this. My point is this. The issue is this, bro. The issue I see with all this stuff is, I believe, white Americans in America, they're like mongrels. People in Europe call them, Merry-Mutts or Yankees. That means like they have no bloodlines, right? America just spun it where they decided, okay, well, if we're gonna be, mongrels, whatever, we're just gonna go off white. That's where white comes from. You go to Europe, they don't ever go by white. They go, I'm Italian, or I'm German, or I'm half German, half French, whatever. So then the white American people, they go off of the history of all of Europe. You'll have people that are like, Mud Irish or whatever, claiming Caesar. It doesn't make any sense at all if you know anything about history. It makes no sense at all. They'll get their bravado from Caesar. It makes no sense at all. You're not, what? But they do that. My biggest thing is, I think if that's the way Americans do it, you take from everything, right? There's the Pan-African, deal in the 70s where they're saying like, oh, we're going to take from all parts of Africa, right? To make, they had like all those other things. I believe Black Americans and people of African descent should take from like the history of Europe and all the things that went on there with the Moors. Like they've literally tried to erase the Moors from history. And when they don't erase them, they try to claim they were Arabic, right? But they weren't Arabic because everything we read about them, they were Black people. Like, because there's distinctions from Caesar rights to everyone rights between a Moor and a Muslim, which means that's the difference between a Muslim, an Arab, and a Black person or African descended person or whatever, right? And they had that, and people knew that history and went off that from the houses of the Darnells and all that stuff in Europe, and Medici and the King of Florence and all that stuff. That would be a better selling point, I believe, for the people going forward. Now, the stuff in America, I think if you understood the contributions that they made in Europe and all these other places, you have a lot less issues with the issues you have in general. Like I believe for the Black people's everything, right? And that would affect, I believe, Africa and everything else if they knew the truth or they embraced the history of it. But pretty much, they've let other people tell the narrative. So more went from meaning African to meaning now it means like an Arab, right? And the sad part is when you go to Italy or Sicily or any of these places or where they had, even with Holland with the Black Pete celebration, if they were Arabs, why are there no Arab statues anywhere? Where are the Arab paintings? None. I see Black people, right? But they've convinced everyone that's not what it is.
We need to get to the next article.
Yeah, go on.
Yeah, I'm kind of following. Also, Rome had 5 Black emperors. Anyway, this move on.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. All right, this one is from express.co.uk. World War III, Russia and China flex military muscle with South African and naval mission. Monday saw the heart of the first ever joint naval drills of Russia, China, and South Africa in what is seen as the latest sign of changing power dynamics on the African continent. The South African fleet, based in nearby Simon's Town, is hosting the exercises, which are codenamed MOSI. MOSI, meaning smoke in Sesotho. A military spokesman confirmed that the focus is on maritime economy, interoperability, and mending relations between participating navies. The drills will take place throughout the week and divided into 2 parts. Let me mute you guys. The first part will see the respective countries' Navy chiefs work out and coordinate their strategies and tactics, while crews carry out onshore training that involves physical training and marching, as well as hand-to-hand combat. The second part begins on Wednesday, when ships will set out to the open ocean for practical action near the Cape of Good Hope. Russia is represented by a naval group headed by the missile cruiser Marshal Ustinov, while South Africa's SAS Amatola frigate and China's Weifang guided missile frigate will also participate. The exercises are taking place in the highly strategic part of the world's oceans and are designed to send clear messages to the West about the growing influence and power of Russia and China. The naval drills are taking place where the Atlantic and Indian Ocean meet. Interesting. The most important naval and trade routes from Europe, Africa, and Asia pass through here, making control of these waters particularly prized asset for.
I struggle the most with trying to.
Sorry, that stupid ad just popped up in my headset. Prized asset of competing international powers. An anonymous ominous sign of Western allies, a naval drill involving South Africa, France, and Germany, which had been planned to take place earlier this year, was postponed and has not yet been rescheduled. President Putin has been on a concerted drive to increase Russian influence on the African continent in recent years. One way Putin has sought to do so to that is through the sale of Russian weaponry. Russia is currently the largest supplier of weapons to Africa and has military cooperation agreements and deals for military and police training with more than half of African nations. In October, Putin signed yet another deal, this time to supply Nigeria with 12 Mi-35 attack helicopters at a conference of African leaders in Sochi. In addition, Putin has concluded a series of nuclear technology deals with Egypt, Rwanda, Ethiopia, Uganda, and Zambia. The Russian president has also sought to increase Russian influence through a shadowy organization called Wagner that supplies Russian mercenaries to embattled African leaders. Wagner is actually no different than Academy or Blackwater. So that's just the Russian equivalent. As well as military personnel, the Wagner Group provides weapons, training, and support police and civilian intelligence services in African countries. A former KGB operative now based in the West described Wagner's meteoric rise in Africa as one of the most successful GRU, Russian military intelligence operations of all time. Documents obtained by the former Russian oligarch and now sworn Putin enemy, Mikhail Khodorkovsky, show that Wagner is behind a covert mission to amplify Russian influence in Africa. The documents show extensive Wagner-linked operations and that the Kremlin plotted to turn Africa into a strategic hub to displace US and European powers. One of the goals is to see off pro-Western uprisings, and apparent reference to combating opposition movements. The documents show the company taking credit for the election of Madagascar's new president, André Rajoelina. So oh man, the new global powers are here. They see Africa as the frontier of the next 100 years. So they are planning to be here for a very long time. HVAC guy, you have anything you want to add to that?
Sorry, if you guys can hear me. Well, actually, that's a mouthful. Mm-hmm. You know, that really is. That's almost like saying it's over with. Mm-hmm. But because you guys are very smart, let me see how I'll go about actually trying to respond. Well, mm-hmm. I saw today that there was an article about South Carolina, I believe, coming up with a new legal currency tender, or I'm saying it backwards, or they have an act where they're trying to get things implemented under gold and silver as a new kind of currency to purchase different things. I forgot, I think it's the Legal Tender Act or something like that, mm-hmm. that they came out with. And now other states have had it. There's 4, I think, altogether. When you hear an article like that, then you hear what you just said. It should be hard for you to go to sleep at night, because what that pretty much is saying is that, okay, y'all got America, fine. We're gonna go over here, secure Africa, get the rest of the resources out of there, gentrify Africa, since the people over in Africa were not able to take advantage of the resources for one reason or another. We know what to do with that. So here, y'all want to go to America? Go over there. You know what I mean? Or we're gonna make deals with your people on land. They're gonna essentially sell you out, whether they're intentionally doing it or they don't know it. And we're gonna take these minerals and we're gonna create new technology, new renewable energy resources, and you're going to be gentrified. It's no different than in Jamaica when the Jamaicans over, not Jamaicans, but the powers that be took that money to get China to come over there to build that bridge. So you're talking about now you $1 billion in debt. The people owe that. So guess what ended up happening? Now gentrification is happening. Everybody's going to America. So you got all these people going to America, but all the white people and the Chinese people and the Russian people are securing these lands. It pretty much just let me know that, you know, I need to start looking into stacking up my silver. I can't really do gold. I would do silver. For me being an HVAC guy, it's something called silver solder. So it actually uses a certain amount of silver and different precious metals so that we can weld the copper lines on a residential house. So for me, I need silver. I can understand when somebody else say they don't need it. That also lets me know that that maybe you shouldn't be going into large amounts of debt moving forward. You should be choosing wisely about your cars, what you're going into debt for, because pretty much that's a frightening article. That pretty much lets us know that there's a very high possibility that you could be in a new form of slavery. Now, I know that's very wild, and people are like, don't say that, man. Okay, the dollar is not really has no value, and it's not backed up by anything. And other nations are going to back their money up by real resources, real something. And where the fuck does that leave us when we just got this paper money? So I don't have much to add, but that's the first thing popping in my head about that article.
All right, let me get to this next article from face-to-faceafrica.com. Did you know white slave owners rape enslaved African males? Here's why. The down low white male strikes again. The quest by white slave owners to dominate Africans were so dire that they devised buck-breaking male slave rape to break the intimidated and strong enslaved African males they have taken delivery of. While homophobia cannot be countenanced in a civil society, the opposition to same-sex union must nonetheless be viewed beyond the lens of morality to historical experience. In Jamaica as well, in other Caribbean states, the opposition to GAY sex is in part due to the distasteful insidiances where a slave owner or an overseer before a Black population raped the dominant male, often comprising his wife and children to emasculate him, to send the warning that their supposed frontman could be tamed. And to reach Nasheed's Hidden Colors documentary, the case is made that right from the ships, which spent some 3 months on the high seas, the enslaved African males were easy target for the captain and his unruly crew, who had their way with hapless men. Sadly, the practice continued on the plantations too, with those who landed in Jamaica being the most brunt, bearing the most brunt. Those who have stated strong opposition to GAY relations have been dancehall artists, but the GAY rights groups have pushed back, haven't even scheduled concerts involving the artists to be canceled. Their protests have been so successful that some of the artists have been banned from Britain by the Home Office. Artists such as Shabba Ranks, Buju Banton, Beanie Man, Bounty Killer, and Sizzla have all been accused of rendering anti-GAY lyrics, express public anti-GAY comments in interviews. While calling for the demise of GAYs is unacceptable, it helps to understand the source of the vehemence with which the Jamaica Society opposes GAY unions. The UK's Crown Prosecution Service has also scrutinized other artists, including Elephant Man, Vybz Kartel, Capleton, and the group TLK, to ascertain if their songs contain homophobic lines. And to America and breeding farms, another devious scheme hatched, all in the interest of making money. When chattel slavery of Africans and African Americans was abolished in the United States in 1865, barring slave traders and owners from importing new slaves from Africa, the owners resorted to making the strongest males mate with the healthiest females to produce babies. As author and historian Anthony Browder puts it, they bred the blacks like cattle, with two of the largest breeding farms in the US being in the eastern shore of Maryland and just outside of Richmond, Virginia. The chosen black male made to have sex with his mother, sister, aunt, or cousin. The slaver didn't care about bloodline and family bond. And it's said the origin of the vulgar slang mother effer was due to some of the sons effing their mothers. According to psychiatrist Dr. Patrice Newton, the breeding farms account for Boston having a high incest problem in the US, with 7 out of 10 people having had an incest experience. When notable singer R. Kelly, who is facing multiple rape charges, was accused of being intimate with minors, who he also submitted he had been abused by his as a child by older relatives, staying with him. Opposition, yeah, I'm not gonna read the whole thing, but the point of the matter here is that these are this should be considered sociopathic behavior by mayonnaise people that has been passed down from generation to generation as a way to keep BMs in control. BMs under control, and unfortunately, that has seeped so deep into the community that people don't really know where it came from.
See, those are excellent points you bring up. We talk about that. WM's mayonnaise sold their own children into slavery as well. These people were psychotic savages. And it just wasn't over just pure economics. There's something wrong with those people in large respect, because you see how they had these insane, crazy wars that have just recently ended. Really, in Europe, literally since the fall of the Roman Empire, it was a roiling group of just wars, 30 years war, 100 years war, and Battle of Agincourt, and Second World War, and First World, Crimean War. These guys just went on just tearing each other out the frame. If you look at the royal crowns that existed throughout Europe, a bunch of incest, bred people, that have same families were banging each other, first cousins were knocking each other out the box. And you had relatives that, if you look at the Queen, England, the Crown of England, and the Romanov family, I think Nicholas and whatever they and one of the other princes, they looked exactly alike. They looked like twins. It was scary looking. So that's why you had so much craziness going on, because you had all that inbreeding. We've got an issue with that here in the Black community as well. That's That's why you see some other madness that goes on, some of the craziness that goes on.
Well,
I put some of that on genetics as well.
Yeah.
I really hate to say that, but unfortunately.
Have you ever read a book, Nagone, called White Trash?
Yeah, I was reading. I'm reading about it's. I got the audiobook. I read the regular book, but I read White Trash. I don't want to even get into just how other whites have chronicled these people that have come over here to the United States and the stuff that they've been caught up into. It's big part of the problem here too. They're highly inbred, and we have some issues here.
A little bit of context, I think one thing people don't realize, like
brother, you can't just jump. HVAC guy had his hand up.
I can't see the hand. That go on.
Yeah, there's a known theory about West Virginia, and how people get down here. So, yeah, go ahead, HVAC guy.
Yeah, this is I think this is just a strategy. It's been around for a couple thousand years. When you look at that movie, The 300, a lot of people never actually did the background on that, and found out that was it was a real 300, but it was designed with a hierarchy as a elder male and a younger male, but the younger male was the beta male, which was the bottom, and the older male was the top. And they were trained together, and they were lovers. But the movie is told as if they were heterosexuals. And I guess I'm bringing up that point to say, based on your article, that's an old strategy. Now, the reason,
30 seconds.
Black people, we have a learning disability. We don't understand war, and that's a part of war. And breaking down, this is what's going on now. So all your leaders, they have to apologize, this, that, and the third. That's going to keep going on. And that's a part of butt breaking. And I'll just leave it at that. And our women have sold us out. They have completely sold us out. Our children are being embraced by it because the women are embracing it so much that now we got to figure out, we got to redesign ourselves as a Black man and possibly pick up this Pan-African thing and start looking for the Brazilian Black woman, the moral Black woman, because it's not in America no more.
All right, let's go to
harsh points, but true on so many levels. Harsh. It's harsh because it's deeper than that.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Yeah, let's go to Mega Man real quick. 30 seconds, Mega Man.
Oh yeah. Well, I just want to clarify that people don't realize it's only America's the only place on earth where we frown upon incest. From right now, Pakistan, Saudi Arabia, to Africa, to all the ruling classes, a lot of the places, and the elite, they practice incest. They practice incest all through the South, Louisiana, the Creole, keep their skin color light skin and all that stuff. Parts of the South, they did even the South did it so bad because they're so scared of being mixed with Black. Hence why you have 40% of the white people in the South have sickle cell anemia, right? Because they got that from their Black ancestor, right? So it's been going on forever. America's only recent place after our medical science went a certain way, we started frowning upon it after we started learning the effects of it overall. But everywhere else in the world, they still practice it. So I'm not really shocked at the incest thing because only America's the only place where we kind of frown upon it. Literally, I have friends of mine now from other parts of the world that they're gonna marry their first cousin, and it's a common thing. To me, I was a weirdo, and I was like, what? So it is what it is on that regard. All the other rape stuff, that's crazy. So
yeah,
that's what I say.
We get to AlJazeera.com. Euro-Africa and the myth of African independence. This should be interesting. On November 22nd, the deadline by which the United Kingdom was supposed to return the occupied Chagos Islands to the African island nation of Mauritius passed. 6 months earlier, the United Nations General Assembly had voted overwhelmingly in favor of the reunification, which came on the tail of the International Court of Justice ruling that British control over the island is unlawful. London's refusal to abide by the ruling and the United Nations resolution prompt immediate reaction and accusations of colonial occupation. The African Union demanded a complete decolonization of the islands. The dispute is all more significant as it falls just days after the 135th anniversary of the Berlin Conference. at which European powers agreed the rules by which they would parcel out Africa among themselves. The AU's demand is a bit curious, linking as it does a British withdrawal with decolonization. But there is a little more to it than that. In fact, although many of the continent have tended to equate decolonization with the dawn of independence in the 1960s, independence, in fact, turned out to be a bit of a hoax. While it undoubtedly improved life for some of the continent, for the most part, it did not mean freedom. Rather, it marked the internationalization and indignation of colonialism. It was to become a tool to transform Africans from being the objects of colonial subjugation into partners in their own exploitation. This is neatly illustrated by now largely forgotten Euro-Africa project. Conceived in the interwar years, it was to become a tool to transform Africans from being just objects of colonial subjugation into partners in their own exploitation. This is neatly illustrated by the now largely forgotten Euro-Africa project. Conceived in the interwar years, it was a plan to replace European colonial competition for Africa's resources with an internationalized colonialism that would allow Europeans to jointly exploit the continent under the auspices of what became the European Union. As European scholars P.O. Hansen and Staffan Johnson of Linköping University in Sweden have noted, the EU, or the European Economic Community, EEC, as it was called at its foundation, was from the outset designed, among other things, to enable rational co-European colonial management of the African continent. As the Chinese do today, in the years following the end of World War II, many in Europe saw in Africa the resources and markets they required to rebuild their shattered economies and to join the United States and the USSR as a third superpower. Africa and its resources thus featured prominently in discussions over the creation of pan-European institutions. The Rome Treaty, which established the EEC in 1957, was nothing short of a resurrection of the Berlin Conference's General Act, which 73 years earlier had sought to create an internationalized regime of free trade stretching across the middle of Africa. In Rome, 6 European countries, without the involvement of any Africans, promised each other equal access to trading and investing opportunities in what is today the territory of 21 African countries: Senegal, Mali, Guinea, Ivory Coast, Benin, Mauritania, Niger, Burkina Faso, and Republic of Congo, the Central African Republic, Chad, Gabon, the Comoros, Madagascar, Djibouti, Togo, Cameroon, the Democratic Republic of Congo, Rwanda, Burundi, and Somalia. In fact, as noted by Hassan and Johnson, 3/4 of the territory covered by the EEC actually lay outside the continental Europe. Although the British did not join the first EEC treaty, they had similar ambitions for retaining control over their colonies. In 1947, the British Chancellor of the Exchequer, Stafford Cripps, declared that in Africa indeed is to be found a great potential for new strength and vigor in the Western European economy. A decade later, in the same year, the EEC was set up. British Prime Minister Harold Macmillan commissioned a cabinet committee report on the effect of African independence on the prestige and influence of the UK, and whether premature withdrawal of the United Kingdom jurisdiction would leave a vacuum which would be filled by a country hostile to the United Kingdom and her allies. It was into this context that the countries of Africa were born. Congenitally, and this happened, they were easy prey for Europe. The Euro-Africa project was simply given a makeover as the 1963 Rwanda Convention signed between the EEC and 18 former French and Belgian colonies. Under the agreement, the Europeans allowed free access to their domestic markets to products from the African members, while the latter were, at least initially, permitted to impose restrictions of the entry of European goods into their territories in order to protect their own infant industries. 3 years earlier, however, the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa had warned, as related by Hassan and Johnson, that the arrangements were likely to lead to economic dependency by tempting the Africans to prefer the short-run advantage of tariff concessions to the long-run gains of industrial development. This is because the Europeans were unlikely to keep their markets open if the Africans actually decided to block out EEC goods. Sadly, the advice fell on deaf ears. Not surprisingly, though, when one remembers how independence was procured. It came in on the wings of African nationalism, which Prime Minister Macmillan famously referred to as the wind of change in a 1960 speech to both houses of the South African Parliament. Yet this nationalism was in itself born, nurtured, and encouraged and shaped by colonialism. Although Europe was the home of nationalism, according to Macmillan, Africans were encouraged to think of its genuine indigenous expression. Even though the African nations espousing it were born out of the 1884 Berlin Conference, and African nationalist leaders were the products of colonial schools in European universities, African nationalism was still cast as the antidote to colonialism rather than an outgrowth of it. Further, as described by the late Kenyan professor Ali Mazrui, African nationalism seeks to achieve and to maintain equality with Europe. Euro-Africa gave African elites the opportunity to prance around the international stage, pretending to be equals of the colonial master whose bidding they were doing. By 1962, an American observer in Paris, Scofield Corio, declared that African countries remained essentially what they were, agricultural appendages to Europe. If this sounds familiar, it is because African elites are, to borrow from Wo Soyinka, still heading to foreign cabinets to proudly proclaim their integrity, while co-signing their countrymen into debt and bondage. Another famous poet, Leopard and Senghor, the first president of independent Senegal, recognized that decolonization was more than simply independence. Right in Le Monde in 1957, he declared, by decolonization, I mean the abolition of all prejudice, of any superiority complex in the minds of the colonizer, and also of any inferiority complex in the mind of the colonized. Senghor personified the contradictions of independence. A formidable intellect, he led his nation into the Yaoundé Agreement, was the foremost prominent of negritude, and ruled for 2 decades before retiring on New Year's Eve 1980, the first African president to leave office voluntarily. He then promptly left for France, where he had been a citizen since 1932. As Andrew W.M. Smith and Chris Jepson note in their introduction to the book, Britain, France, and the Decolonization of Africa, colonial authority never rested on judicial control alone. Its perpetuation depend upon complex systems of knowledge and power that facilitated the physical, racial, and economic, linguistic subordination of colonial peoples. As long as it was built on the same systems and logic, independence was never going to undo it. True decolonization requires more than just the physical absence of the colonizer. It means deconstructing the frameworks that have been used to define the African's place for him. That is the work that remains to be done. I think this was one of the most excellent pieces I've read all year. Oh, HVAC guy has his hand up.
Yeah, that was that article just has a lot of double talk in it. So, for me, I was able to read through the lines and figure out what they're really trying to say without really trying to say it. And it's a mass takeover. Mm-hmm. It will, the people of the land in Africa will lose their tribe and their identity because they'll be forced over here under African American, because there won't be no Jamaican American, Haitian, because and I'm not trying to erase somebody's history. What I'm trying to say is that's what they're doing. And the more you come over here, you're going to become more of an American because they are silencing people's right to express religious freedom, which might have a lot to do with your tribe or your identity. And you will be submerged back under just being Black. And that's why, we run into some issues here because the B-dubs are in a blunder or a psychological stupor, if you will. And at this point, they can't break out of it because it's about survival. It's like, okay, do I go back over there to the BMs, tell them, hey, I'm sorry? That's not going to work because even if you tell us sorry, we know that you're conditioned. So that's where the Pan-African thing, as more people come over here, we're going to have to me, expand into finding a new BW. Container homes. That's the first thing I thought about when I said people being displaced and how they're going to get houses. If you're coming over here, we have this mass gentrification over here, where they don't care if you have money as a Black person or your credit score. It's a survival thing for for the others. Mm-hmm. And acquiring lots and acquiring land and looking into how to get the blueprints for the piping and everything so you can put a container home on there, and us also getting bills passed for container homes will help us in this process with people coming from this tribe, that tribe coming over here. That'll help. Also too, what's going to really, the military, 500,000 Black people in the military generate about $28 billion if they all making $40,000 a piece. So 500,000 times 40,000, it should be about $28 billion. Those people have more wealth than all the tens of millions of Blacks. So those people need to create a networking circle. It doesn't matter if you're a physician, HVAC, electrician, because it's only going to be a pocket of groups that have residual income, and that's the main thing. There's not going to be a lot of people in this country that have residual income. And Pan-African military, yeah, we need more automotive, electricians, physicians, lawyers, and techs, specifically because that's also the container homes. We can either make it a home, make it a food lab, because they're closing down foods and stores and stuff. And that's all I got to say, man.
All right, I think Nikki has his hand up. Go ahead, Nikki.
Yeah, like I saw the article. What the last guy just said, I see that as well. I just think it's more about like treaties and what's going on with China and Hong Kong now. Like China's not honoring their treaties, and everyone's mad about like the Hong Kong situation because China's supposed to get it back, I think, in 2024, I think, and they're going early to try and get it back. And that's a big issue to everyone. But if you notice how like Europe and America,
2046, brother, 2046.
Yeah, we're not saying anything. That's because like I think the European countries plan to do the same, like what happened in this article with other provinces and places where they made deals. They're gonna take back what they're gonna renege on the deals essentially, right? So that's why you don't see Americans. We're protesting, but our government and all the rest of the governments aren't doing anything to interfere with China. Now it kind of like more makes sense to me. So
okay. Nicole, you have anything? Colonialism.
No, I was just I was doing something else here for a second. I'm sorry, guys.
Fine.
Let me finish up. I got some people rolling through, so I just
All
wanted to. Yeah, I'll be back with you guys in a second. Just give me a minute. All right.
Let me get to this next article real quick. All right, this one is from NBCnews.com. America's last slave ship could offer a case for reparations, but according to these naysayers, there was no slave ship, so no need for reparations. Mobile, Alabama. Alabama's steamship owners Timothy Meher financed the last slave vessel that brought African captives to the United States, and he came out of the Civil War a wealthy man. His descendants, with land worth millions, are still part of Mobile society's upper crust. The people whom Meher enslaved, however, emerged from the war with freedom but little else. Census forms that documented Meher's post-war riches list them as laborers, housewives, and farmers with nothing of value. Many of their descendants today hold working-class jobs. Now, the history of Meher and the slave ship Clotilda may offer one of the more clear-cut cases for slavery reparations, with identifiable perpetrators and victims. While no formal push for reparations has begun, the subject has been bubbling up quietly among community members since earlier this year, when experts said they found the wreckage of the Clotilda in muddy waters near Mobile. Some say too many years have passed for reparations. Others say the discovery of the ship makes the timing perfect. Many Clotilda descendants say reconciliation with the Mehers would suffice, perhaps a chance to discuss an intertwined history. Others hope the family helps with ambitious plans to transform a downtrodden community into a tourist attraction. Some want cash, some want nothing. Reparations debates usually involve redress for the multitude of descendants from about 4 million Black people who were enslaved in the United States. But with Congress considering whether to create a reparations study commission, what might a single instance of reparations look like in the city where the nation's Atlantic slave trade finally ended? Pat Frazier, a descendant of Meher slave James Dennison, isn't sure, but she's unhappy about the lack of justice and what many consider the deafening silence of the Meher family. I've never known them to just own up to what happened, said Frazier, 68. In Mobile, like many Southern communities, descendants of slave owners and enslaved people are often neighbors, though in vastly different circumstances. Originally from Maine, Meher moved south and got rich off of steamboats and a sawmill. He purchased the schooner Clotilda for a reported $35,000 and financed a slave expedition to West Africa the year before the war began. The international slave trade was already outlawed, but Meher wagered he could import slaves in defiance of the ban. Arrested after the ship carrying about 110 captives arrived and was scuttled in Mobile in 1860, he was cleared of charges by a judge, according to Dreams of Africa in Alabama, a book by Diouf. Historical accounts say Meher refused to provide land after the war to the freed Africans, who then scraped together money to purchase property. They founded a community called Africatown, USA, where some of the West African ways of the once enslaved people were preserved. Remnants still exist. Meher listed assets included $20,000 in land and personal property in the 1870 census. A newspaper article said his son, Augustine, was a multimillionaire in 1905. Court records from 2012 say the Meher family real estate company held $35 million in assets, including 22,000 acres of land, timber, plus rental income in cash. Tax records show Meher relatives remain large landowners with $20 million in property through the corporation. One of Timothy Meher's distant granddaughters was feted as the White Queen of the city's racially segregated Mardi Gras in 2007. White Queen. The Black Queen that year was a descendant of one of the Cotila Africans. The Mobile area, or the Mobile area, features Meher State Park and Meher Avenue near Africa Town, and the Meher family has signs throughout the area offering land for lease. A red concrete marker bearing the family's name stands in the Tensar Delta near the spot where the Cotila remains were found last year. There's no consensus of what reparations might include for Cotila descendants. Jocelyn Davis, who helped organize the Cotila Descendants Association, said conversation would be a good start. If we could just sit down at the table and just talk, that would be a powerful thing, she said. Bill Green, a descendant of Cotila captive Osa's Kibi, said people are do more than talk. He called reparations an excellent idea. If not personal payments to Cotila descendants, they could include contributions to some group to help descendants, perhaps to revitalize Africa Town parks, a memorial, a Cotila replica, housing, and businesses. I think it would be equitable for them to make some payment to the descendants of the Cotila cargo. What is right? I think we're in a prime position to have our court system decide something, said Green of Texas. Diouf, who has closely studied the Cotila and Africa Town, said the Meher clan inherited generational wealth while Timothy Meher's captors scraped by. There was nothing, and there is still nothing, she said. The National African American Reparations Commission, formed in 2015, is seeking an apology for slavery plus money for business development, health, education, historic preservation, housing, criminal justice reform, and more. The Mehers aren't saying what, if anything, they want to do, and have made no public comment about the Cotila discovery. I'm gonna just read this last part. In an interview, Sledge declined to say where he heard the story, but I really wonder how much anyone knew. That's the big question to Ted Kibi, another descendant of Cotila captive Osa Kibi, who knew what? He wants to know more about the Mehers and the lives of the people Timothy Meher enslaved. I have no feelings about what happened, and it's part of history, but I would love to meet them. They are part of the history, he said. Yeah. All these people, all these naysayers of history, they always talk about, oh, there was no slave ships. What are you talking about? What do you call this thing right here in 1860? Let me get to the hands that are raised. Let's go to complex design. What's going on, dude?
Hey, good evening, everyone. What's going on, Mike? I don't really have anything to put in on this because I kind of came in halfway through. So I'm going to just listen in. I'll chime in a bit.
All right, let's go to Mega Man.
All right, well, great story. The issue here is not really is the legality of it. That's what needs to really be the central theme. Like if it was illegal for him to have a slave ship there, and then he had the people there, and then they were freed afterward or whatever, that's where their legal case stands upon. You can't even though it'd be nice to, America's not, it doesn't ever retroactively change laws to like give people stuff, you know, or get people what they deserve. It doesn't happen that way in America. If the laws were the way they were back then, whatever it is after, they could argue a lot of different things. What they need to argue is the fact that, you know, the people made money, the family that had money made money off the descendants of those slaves, and that's how they bought their land or whatever, or else they're owed something for that. But then again, there's no legal precedence even written about that yet. So it's going to be very hard for them to get, like, the people could do it, which would be great, it'd be a great thing, but legally it'd be a hard court battle to fight, because public opinion is not going to sway them changing laws in the books the way it's always been till now. They could write something now to retroactively do that, but I don't see them doing that. This is more something where it's going to be an argument. People are going to say both sides. Maybe the media could guilt the family into doing the right thing. Other than that, legally, I see the courts ruling the way they've already ruled already. That's all I got to say.
Well, let me chime in on that point. You're absolutely right. So you would have to have some sort of national mandate pushed with regards to some sort of reparations, like an act, right, or a bill that's passed, which gives the retroactive legal framework for there to be some sort of compensation to happen as a result of something that happened in the past. That's the actual act that the government would have to take in order to enable something like that. You have to have like a reparations act or a bill or something to that effect that's pushed. Case in point would be, let's take marijuana legalization, like in the states where it's recreationally legal. Okay, in order for that to have been pushed through, there had to be something in the legalization bill that addressed people who were imprisoned by the stuff in the past, right? So that means record expungements and stuff like that. So similar to that, there would have to be a bill passed in order to gain something like that with regards to some sort of reparative measure. As it stands, you're absolutely right. To the brother who was just speaking, you're absolutely right. As it stands, there's no statute on the books that you could adjudicate based off of, you know, for a past offense, a past like slavery, unless there's some sort of bill that says, you know, we're going to acknowledge this, and going forward, based on this set of criteria, this is how we're going to adjudicate.
Yeah, just to clarify, yeah, I completely concur with what you're saying. Like, with the marijuana law, I think it's legal in like Colorado, Washington State, and California. One thing people don't understand is, like, I don't know which state it was. I think one of the states made a retroactive bill that they were going to address past convictions through the lens of the new bill. I don't know what state it was, but one state didn't. So another state, I think it might be California, they haven't. Yeah. So like, if you're arrested prior to the bill, you're still doing your 15 years, however much it is, and people are fighting for that right now. You got to add a retroactive bill to it. It has to go through the ballot and all that stuff, and the Hill and all that stuff. So yeah, I completely concur with you. You know.
Yeah, the only hang up, and you know, there's no disagreement. I was just gonna speak to the details of that. The only hang up with that was that, like, let's say, you know, you got busted on a marijuana charge, but there was also a weapons charge involved, right? So they'll expunge the marijuana part. That doesn't mean your ass is getting out or like your record's getting completely clear. But yeah, that was kind of one of the things that they went back and forth with. And that was here in California, was that, yeah, if it's marijuana related, yeah, but if there were other charges related to that, okay, those charges stay.
Oh yeah, 100%. Another thing too, people don't really understand about marijuana stuff. I know everyone's telling people like, oh, start these marijuana things. Like, people don't realize, like, you can't like really buy anything with this marijuana money. Just to stay on topic, you can't really like move the money out of your state, like, legally at all. Like, if you try to, feds are coming. Like, it's federally illegal still to this day, right? So like, that's what people say. It's like in California, people argue there's racism in it with the way they adjudicate the marijuana laws, because if you're in LA County, they'll raid certain people's, you know, clinics, but other people's clinics leave them alone because it's federally illegal, statewide legal, right? So that's a whole nother host of worms and wasps or whatever. But yeah, I completely concur with you, sir. You're right, 100%.
If I can get in on it, I wanted to actually say some harsh things, and before we go to those other articles, and you probably not gonna like me for this, but Indentured servitude versus slavery. Well, that's the argument that is going to keep us from actually even getting reparations, because in the Geneva Convention, and there's some things that tied up that said you really couldn't just come on a land and make somebody a slave. You had to purchase them through prisoners of war. They even made a movie about it called Amistad, that it kind of says that, they kind of denotes that, well, there couldn't have been real slavery everywhere because of the Geneva Convention and these laws, these land laws, these sea laws. So that's how we are flipped. Black people, we do have a learning disability. We have some very smart people, but it seems to me that we have a very short-term memory of things. And because I'm from College Park, Georgia, and I remember being a child growing up, that people didn't say, people were telling me that, hey, I'm Cherokee, you know, I'm red tail, I'm this. They never said nothing about no African. Again, this is, some people might say it's propaganda based on what, Alex Haley, and the whole thing to make Black people think that you come from somewhere else. Now, of course, prisoners of war were brought over here and mixed, no different than the bubonic plague that had those Mongolians. Once they then made so many diseases kill off everybody on the Silk Road, they said, okay, let's go to fucking America. And they had to adopt the Aboriginals' heritage and put on the feathers and everything. And then when the Pilgrim came, because we never had war tactics, mind you, we got Florida, we got fruits, we got everything we need here. There's no need to ever leave. And that whole thing speaks to why we were so comfortable and why you never were even trained for war. And it could possibly blow up in our faces because we don't have our records to prove we were even in Africa. I mean, the 40 million Blacks here, and then they also messed up our records with the freedom's thing, and we don't have our records for all the 550 Native American tribes that they allegedly killed off, when really they didn't kill us off, they just renamed us. And we're, you know, a lot of us already were here. Not to be harping on that. Slavery, reparations, no. Trump would give it to us just to piss off other white people, because technically he's German. And, you know, it's funny that, right. And it's funny that a man like that is actually speaking to peasant whites, and they're, you know, who are alt-right, and they're supposed to hate people who are Jewish and this, that, and the third. That's kind of weird. Black people having, I was out in that Geneva Convention, and that's also what the Buffalo Wars were about, because to kind of back up just a little bit, we've been fighting so-called slavery. We got the Seminole Wars. That's what's us. They renamed us. Before we were Negro, they called us Seminole to mess up our tribe names. So some of this is on record, and it's very hard for us to actually get reparations because we really don't know which one to follow. Now, my last point is the civil rights. Now, somebody say, let's make them give us civil reparations. Well, we would have to go to the civil rights bill. Our reparations, believe it or not, is in that civil rights bill. We just have to ask them to redesign it for melanated people, all the Black people coming over from, you're kicking out the Jamaicans. You tricked the people there, you built that bridge. Now all the people there got to pay a higher tax. Okay, those are Black people now because you forced them out. All the people who are Black, who are good stewards, have good records, some kind of system, vetting system, the good Blacks. Now, I'm not, we could say, hey, let's redesign the civil rights bill. Our reparations is in civil rights bill. Why? Because they're not going to create a new bill for it. You would have to go back to something implemented that actually binds us to something being disrespected to us blocking us out because of us being Black, and that would be the civil rights. Now, that might make a lot of people pissed off because we might have to go against other nations. They might say, you're messing up our stuff trying to change stuff in there. You changing that word minority to, I don't know, Aboriginal Black people. You know, Jamaican, he's a now Aboriginal. The African, he's all Aboriginal Black people get it now. Let's just say that, okay, now we got to go to war with other nations. So other nations are especially Mexicans, people don't know the history between whites and Mexicans. They have a history, and that's why they are going to be the second coming of your oppressor. To a certain extent. You can laugh, but I'm in Colorado. I came here in 2014, Fort Carson, and I retired here. So I've got the marijuana industry down packed to the CBD, to the labs. I done wrote journals on it. I done stole these people information. I done talked to the Black Godmother that's in Denver, the only Black person they ever let do the marijuana industry and have a business in the whole state is a Black woman and her Black husband, which is in Denver. We call it a Black godmother, because they only let one in at a time. There goes that one in at a time thing that they do. So we are in a bit of a pickle, but I think if they was gonna give it to us, they would probably give it to us in Bitcoin, something that they, which I say that's a good thing because the dollars. Sorry, man. That's all I got to add.
All right, Mega Man had his hand up.
I want to respond to your claims of like the Aborigines and all that stuff, and one thing I'll clarify, I believe that is true. I believe there always was, people that were Black here. Christopher Columbus was not the first person to come to America, and prior other people have been here. The thing you understand is that America already kind of dealt with that issue when they how Florida State has the Seminoles, right? That's their thing, and how that's the only Native American thing no one goes after. No one goes after the Seminole Indian mascot because the Seminole tribe is a maroon tribe, maroon society. It's Black and Natives mixed together over and over and over. The thing you understand is during the 1970s, we had the whole Indian Indian groups that started doing their own civil rights thing. They voted to expel a lot of the Black members out to get more money. Tribes and casinos and all that stuff in certain areas. Not all tribes did it. Florida's one of the ones that kept their Seminoles were the strongest ones. They're nope, we're this. But the rest of them did it. And unfortunately for that, I think a lot of people should read the book Lakota Woman. It's a great book, but it talks about, how eventually that led to them and the Indian schools and all that stuff, having them lose their, heritage and all that stuff. And that's why you see a Native American, they show you Johnny Depp, right? You see Johnny Depp or you Val Kilmer, you're like, it looks like a white guy. Well, that's what they've done. They've essentially taken their heritage, especially the main one is the Cherokee Nation and the $5 Indian situation, where they basically swapped out the real natives they said they're too dark or too whatever, and convinced the natives to go with that situation with the blood quantum rule, but from a white perspective, right? But that kicked out, I think, in my personal view, at least 33/4 of the natives that went back to the Black American Society, right? Most of the time, let's say a slave or a free Black went off, most of the time they didn't marry a white person. That was that was lasting from their mind. They'd marry either into a native situation or they'd marry other colored people that were freed, or else if they ran off, the maroon society. So even prior to that, there is statements of them being indigenous to the land, but it doesn't really matter, only because that America dealt with that with the blood quantum laws. And then the native group decided that they'd expel anyone that wasn't certain percent of native. That native percent quantum goes from a white to native scale, not from if you're Asian and native, 50-50, you're Asian. If you're Black and native, 50-50, you're Black. The only time you get the other side, if you're white, then if you're white mixed native, you can still be native. That's why you have Elizabeth Warren claiming to be native, but she has not one drop of a Native American blood because her family's Indian. So I see your point.
Oh, yeah, her mother told her that she was.
Yeah, it's one other issue. But yeah, I see your point and I concur with it. But
told her that she was Cherokee, but she just drives a Jeep Grand Cherokee. So
yeah, my whole point is, back to my point is, the native groups went and they did that. The only group that stayed firm with their rule was the Seminoles. That's why the Seminoles, you don't see them going through all that, my mascot, all that other stuff. They're firm staple in Florida. They're recognized and they're mixed with Black in Maroon society, because I think the laws went statewide. Each tribe got to decide by their state. So that's why you have those situations. So yeah, I concur with you, but I think it's a very hard pill to get to, because you're mixing so many different situations. But because like I said before, I believe Black Americans are simply a mixture of 80% African DNA, 10%, the 10% Native, and that's what it is. It's been an amalgamation of all those three cultures together. Is what Black American, not anything from Africa, not anything from anywhere else, from the Americas. Just like Haitians have the French and the Black, that's their culture. Just like Dominicans have the and the Black. That's why I look at it as. That's the way I think they should look at it going forward.
Let me. My whole point about this is the reason reparations won't work, because they gave you two sets of history. Telling you that you're African, that's your genealogy. At this point, before a couple hundred, that's your genealogy, which is different than when you left, because we've always had learning disabilities and we had to separate from each other. And we've been all around this damn planet. Every race that you see is our child. There's a Black version of every person that's a race somewhere. And that's why secretly, that's probably why they hate us. But because you have been told two different histories, it's protecting them from giving you, because let me give you an example. Okay, let me real quick. So you got Madam C.J. Walker. Let's say 1807, she's a millionaire. How the hell is she a millionaire and the majority of Black people are slaves? Don't answer that. So you got all these inventors between the 1860s and the 1930s who invented all this stuff, including air conditioning, right? So we have these so-called slave people, that's in the sharecroppers, right? Out of clear blue sky, slavery is abolished. And somehow they just become extremely smart and they just start inventing all the shit that we use today. That's another point. Don't answer that. I'm just making these points so you can understand how there's a loophole somewhere here where we're not connecting the dots. And also too, people say, well, the Tosco, we had way more at Rosewood. Listen, Black people, we had millionaires since the 1800s, and this is the whole indentured servitude versus the slavery that the Haitians, the Jamaicans, they went through, where we had so many inward fighting that this is the storyline, and I'll stop. This is the storyline. We became indentured servitudes because we were already Native Americans here. We lacked war strategies. Peace pipe smoking people, we lacked all this type of stuff. We had no real reason to fight. Only people that came here were the Mongolians because of the bubonic plague. We gave them our culture, just like you see these damn M&Ms and all these other damn people. We lend our culture to people. It's nothing to us to keep doing this. So that's a similarity there. Now, I'm not saying we're Native American. I'm not saying we're not African. I'm just saying that there's truth on both sides. And because that line has been blurred, you can't get reparations, because I wouldn't even be surprised if white people said, okay, y'all keep asking us for this reparation. We're just going to tell the truth. We enslaved all these other people. We put y'all in indentured servitude. We had y'all on something called staffing agencies. Y'all all were divided, had different tribes in America, but we told you we can give you more money, more resources, more gunpowder, more this if you come over to this land. Little did you know that the Mongolian Native American made a deal with him, because he said, if you don't come with us, all these other dark so-called Seminoles, they have more power. So do you want to have more power than them? So you got on the land, you got all your names there. They had a list, and then maybe a year, 2 years go by, and then they change your name. You ain't whatever. So now this is their argument. It's not mine. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying I wouldn't be surprised if white people come up and say, you know what? We're just going to tell you the truth. You're Native American, and your money is owed to the so-called Native American. To me, this has already been designed already. That's why I said leave it alone, because it's too intricate. Let's go back to the Civil Rights Bill and ask them to re-change stuff that you need for Black people in there. And the marijuana industry is ours. We need that. That's ours. And we can't afford all these elaborate buildings. Give us grants for container homes so that we can make labs and stuff like that. That's all I got to say.
All right, let me get to this next article from Quartz.com. This is the final article. How colonial rule committed Africa to fragile authoritarianism. Oh, this is behind the wall. Damn, must have waited too long. The impact of colonial rule on sub-Saharan Africa continues to be the subject of intense debate and controversy. Barely a year goes by in the UK without a public figure igniting a furor by arguing that colonialism somehow benefited the people it oppressed. But our new book, Authoritarian Africa, Repression resistance and the power of ideas paints a very different picture. We reevaluate the political legacy of colonialism and find that it had a profound impact on African political systems. It should, as it was top down run and shoved down their fucking throats. What else were they supposed to use? Complex design, you have anything you want to add?
Yeah, I wanted, it was kind of trailing off of the last sort of point that was being made about sort of like the whole Native American thing here. I had just a quick anecdote to share. So, you know, my mother's side, all Cherokee. Okay, you go to like my great auntie's house, you go to all the older folks in my homes, in their homes, and all it is just it's old, kind of like old country, old culture stuff that's in there, right? I kind of grew up in it. The interesting story about my great grandfather, okay, and I think that this may be one of those types of stories that probably is applicable to a lot of Black people, probably more Black people than we know. I just happen to know it because I heard it from some, you know, some of my great aunties and you know, in my family. But basically, at the turn of the New Deal, right when the New Deal happened, right when everyone was able, or when Social Security became a social mandate for this country, right? You had groups of Black folks who, according to the census, were actually what the brother was just speaking about. We were all different types of, you know, there were all sorts of designations. It'd be curious if somebody could dig up like a census form from like the early 1900s. You'll see all type of stuff on there. So, you know, Black folks that identify themselves as, you know, Black Irish, Cherokee, Algonquin, Narragansett. I mean, it was like all types of different clans and, you know, nations that you know, that certain groups of Black people coalesced around. But at the advent of the New Deal, though, what you had to do was identify as, say, like, was it a Black American, Negro American, whatever the socio-political term was, for a group of people who would then be more or less rolled into the New Deal structure of things, right? So what happened was you had a lot of Black. My great grandfather did this. He basically rid himself of his native heritage, and basically changed his socio-political designation to like Black American or whatever the hell it was, so that he could receive Social Security benefits. And sometimes it may have been just as pervasive as that. You know, I like when my great auntie was telling me this, and I was like, really? And she was like, yeah, that's what he did. He was like, we did that, and then we relocated from Missouri and we migrated to Arizona to go and work in the lettuce fields. And I just kind of sat there for a minute. I said, wait a minute, like just like that, huh? Like completely just. And she was like, well, you see why we keep it around, but that's pretty much what happened. So, I mean, I've always been curious as to, well, you know, how many Black folks here who maybe some of like their closer ancestors may have done something like that. Like there was no talk or no discussion of anyone that forced them to change their name or any of that type of stuff. There was no gun pointed toward. He simply wanted Social Security. He wanted to get the Social Security thing the same thing with the New Deal brought about. He wanted what everybody else was going to get. And so, you know, that next Census Bureau, I don't know what year it was that he did it, but, you know, he classified himself as whatever the socio-political designation was. And that was pretty much the end of that.
Let's go to Mega Man. He has his hand up.
Yeah. So, like I concur with what he just said. And I think the one thing people don't really understand is that, like, I don't think people really understand how America got formed. I think people, like, they believe the narrative that's told and Thanksgiving, all that crap or whatever. Those are very, very different places. People forget Louisiana was ran by the French, right? California was owned by the Mexicans. California, through Utah to Texas, all not even Mexican people we see now, but the Californios were the children of the rich Spaniards, right? And then the mixed race offspring of all them as well, too, right? And the one thing I always look at it kind of that I think, when America decided after 1800s to codify each other, they just made they made races, right? You're black, you're white, whatever, which came from the fact that, like, if you guys ever watch a good movie that shows this is Gangs in New York. Like, it's very, very accurate to how they treated people based off your ethnicity and nationality. So if you're Irish, you were less than. If you were this, you were that, right? And the thing about that was because of the fact that in Europe, still this day, they're very, very particular if you're French or if you're Irish or if you're Dutch or if you're Welsh and all this other stuff. And they have their own hierarchy, as other races and groups did. And I think the one thing that confuses everybody is, like, in my personal view, from my own research, I think what confuses a lot of people is they gloss over the fact that there were Moors in America and in Europe, and they were people of high class, right? So the other guy was talking about how you had people that were, how this person in 1802 was able to create this or that? Well, people forget Europe wasn't like you had no schools or nothing. Prior to that, in Europe, there was parliament. There was a whole class of black nobles. You can look at Rembrandt's paintings from way back when. You can look at the kings of Sicily and the kings of other parts of Europe. And those people, like, some of them came over to America, right? There's a whole group of people who claim themselves to be a Mundlegunian or something like that. It's like a mixture of 3 races and all that stuff. The truth of the matter is those people were the descendants of the Black Moors, and they told them to say they're Portuguese because the race stuff was changing around that time. But what people don't really understand is racism didn't even start in the world until 1614. That's when racism officially started, right? Prior to that, it was either you were noble or you were savage, regardless of race, color, or serf or plebeian, right? And the reason I say that is because people forget that a lot of the kingdoms in Europe always had mixed race nobles and stuff, only because of the fact that, let's say I'm a king, right? I want to take over Providence. I'm going to marry my daughter to whoever the leader of that province is, regardless of race. What are the offspring going to be? They're going to be nobles, right? Whatever the race is or color is. So people forget that, and people don't know that. So when it comes to American history, why you have this or that, no one really understands. Like, if there's slaves, how does black person become this? Well, maybe that black person was from a higher class. There still was classism all through America. People try to forget, like, there truly was a huge class. Like, there was a plebeian class, there were the serf classes. Those are the white people that were very, very poor, indentured servitude, basically slaves or whatever. Like, there was all of that. And there's all that the whole time. So I think when people start looking into that, start to understand how you had different designations of races and colors, because it makes sense if back in 1700, before we got California or Louisiana, the French had a whole different classification for race, right? In the French world, if you're a French person, you can marry a slave, you can be a slave, have children. Because they were Catholic, they couldn't just have the slave be enslaved forever. They had to free them. So a lot of times they'd free them, and then those people became the gens de cabreux, that's their name for it. They had quadroon balls. They took all the mixed race girls to be the concubines of middle class, upper class French people. The kids of those unions became higher class people of color in Louisiana. There's a lot of stuff people don't understand that they understood. They'd make a lot of stuff more clear, is what I'm trying to say. So,
Orientalist artwork depicts a lot of what you just said.
Yeah, he'd be 100% right, because people don't understand, like, the one issue I think that makes everyone think everyone's like, this makes sense, is they've kind of erased the Moors from history. You don't ever learn about it. No one talks about it. It's a vague theme people talk about. And then now they try to do they're Arabs or Muslims or whatever. And whenever anyone tells me that, I look at them and say, okay, that's fine. If that's the case, why don't we see any beef with Italians and any Arab people? How come when Italians are very racist, have issues with African people? Why would that be? Why would Italians be considered, as someone said earlier today, they're considered the amalgamation between black and white in the 1900s when they first came? People forget Italians were whitened up after World War II and World War I, because you had a whole class of people that were poor from the south and north, poor white people. They couldn't afford wives, because back in the day you had to pay a dowry and all that stuff, right? So we have all these Irish and Italian people that are the poorest clash, right? So what they do, they gave the soldiers wives who happen to be Italian or an Irish. Hence why most white people in America will tell you, my grandmother's Irish, my great-grandmother, that's where all that stuff starts from. And don't forget, prior to that, the Irish were considered dogs and Italians were considered worse than dogs and wops. They lived in the poor areas, poorer than the upper class blacks or people like W.E.B. Du Bois and all them lived, right? They were considered the immigrant plebeian classes, essentially. And people just erase that or forget about it, and then none of this makes any sense. But if you know that, it does make perfect sense, is what I'm trying to say. So yeah.
Especially when you look into these factors. Now, I'm not here to actually advocate to say Black people give up your African tradition and be Native Americans. I wasn't trying to stir up any trouble. I just think that from I'm 36 years old, and I'm here in Colorado Springs, and I could tell you that we have a learning disability, and that's really what it is. And I know, like, don't talk about us like that. Well, we need to get some clarity of why we can't remember certain things, and it's because we had to take a lot of laws, man. What about if somebody? No, hold on. What about if somebody said, you know, the real reason Black Americans can't swim is because you never had to leave America. If you wanted fruit, you go to Florida. If you wanted potatoes, you go to Idaho. You go see the other tribes, the other 550 tribes. This tribe had the potato. This tribe had this. The tribes had that. So you never had to do nothing but just go over a creek or a boat or a river. You never had to really worry about swimming. What about if they use these things that we all wonder about? And we say, yeah, why Black people can't really swim? What's up with that? But the Africans can swim all day. Why is that? I'm just saying it brings some kind of clarity to where we got to start saying, when I grew up in Georgia, like I was telling y'all earlier, people didn't say nothing about Africa. I'm talking about everybody was like Cherokee, Pictou. They was red tail. That was real big between Florida and Georgia, because at one time that was really one whole state. But they broke it up and all the other type of stuff. Like my people on my mama's side, they from Gainesville, Florida. They've been there hundreds of years. I know y'all don't want to believe this, but we got records that go back to the 1800s. They have an original name called Danzy, D-A-N-Z-Y. You go, something is off, because you're telling us that we had millionaires in the 1800s, but we were still slavery. But we had all these inventors that invented everything, but they only did it once they came out of slavery. You had the stock market
during slavery. They did it during slavery.
Okay, but right, whoever tells the narrative, right? Because that's what we're talking about. Who gets to the narrative first and gets to tell our narrative? Yeah, we got the records. We all understood on one accord where we came from. We had the right records. We could tell the correct narrative. But as long as powers that be are telling our narrative, we're going back and forth saying, hey, well, technically we need to be Africans, when really you're just Aboriginal people here who have African genealogy, who left Africa because we've had the same learning disability of not getting along. Like it say in Exodus or Genesis, when Moses came and said, my people lack void of knowledge. Who is that speaking to? That's us. What do we have now? We got women in psychological stupors and stuff. They don't even know what side to be on. They so damn confused. We over here getting passports, going to Brazil. I know I am. So that's what I'm trying to say. We have to look into that and say, are we really Aboriginals who just have African genealogy, and this reparation stuff can blow up in our face? Because really the people that was on the islands, the Haitians, the Jamaicans, the St. Thomas, and they went through real slavery. We went through indentured servitude. And if we want some form of reparations for all of us, then we have to go to the Civil Rights Bill and redesign that.
Go ahead, Complex.
I was just going to pose a question. Can anyone name a continent where melanated folks aren't there in an Aboriginal form?
Everywhere. He's everywhere. And everybody's your kids now. The Mark Wahlbergs and stuff, ain't nothing but a Melungian. That's when you pass quadron, octron, and you become passive white. When we talking about this, we talking about the what happened with the movie Gone with the Wind, because I'm from Metro Atlanta Zone 3. And like I was trying to tell people, in 1942, they built the biggest projects in Atlanta for immigrants because they lost so many whites. The whites that came out of here, the peasant whites. So they said, all right, give us all your whites and all this, and brought them in Atlanta. That's what that movie was really about. It was, if you go back and look at it from this narrative, what we speak it now, you'll see the peasant white. You'll see why they was sharing that one white girl. Everybody shared that one white girl. That was everybody's girl. It wasn't just his girl. So they're telling the truth, but we can't catch it. We can't see the similarities of, they're telling us the truth in the movie Amistad. There's no way you can, because they had too many pirates, too many land. You had people who were strictly warlords of the water. They had people who they protect the border of the land. They didn't even mix with the people because that's what your main job was. And you couldn't just roll up and do nothing. But in America, because the Native Americans did not have border protection. That's what I've seen throughout this. They had bad border protection. And that's how we got in the pickle that we in now.
Mega Man has his hand up, and he will be the last word for tonight.
Yeah, like I concur with the stuff you're saying. I think the one thing people don't realize, like you talked about pirates and stuff like that. One thing people don't know is like the Moors were like the best seamen. They were the pirates, a lot of them. They were the ones on the coast. Even when they do their cartoons rendition, I remember there's a cartoon show like Pirates of the Water and all that crap, right? It was a little kid cartoon. But even then, they depicted the main character very dark skin. So much so they whiten him up in the future versions to go whatever. But that's what it was. Like a lot of times people don't really see between the lines. Like they're trying to think about people that were there without telling you what they really were and what they controlled, what power they had. So like it makes sense, but you gotta understand history is written by the victors. Like you gotta look from a prime perspective. I look at it this way: like people still don't believe, despite the evidence, that Egypt was African. Like every time I see an Egyptian statue, I don't know about you guys, I see a black person's face or African person, descended person's face. Every time you get a full, usually they break the noses off. It's always funny to me how whenever a European finds it, the nose is broken off. But when it's found by actual architects from Egypt or whoever, they'll give you a full statue. It looks like an African person to me, right? And then the area, the geography, the hieroglyphics, like they're painting black people, in my view, or what we consider black now, right? But still, they let people believe that, oh man, like it's not that. And then they make a movie like Gods of Egypt that flopped horribly because people got a lot smarter about it. Because now that we know about genetics and biology, we know it could never have been the white people we see now because they would have died from skin cancer, 100%. It's too hot, right? So like my entire point is like, everything the guy's saying is right, but you understand like history's written by the victors. Like there's no one stopping, at least not anymore, Africans or Black Americans from writing down their history. But I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that African people and natives and every other group besides white Americans, and maybe you could maybe say the Chinese, they never wrote down history. It was passed down orally, right? But that practice has changed because now the narrative of history, people interject things. Back in the day, history is very sacred. People had to be very, very accurate. The change of narrative in my view didn't really start until, about 1600, 1615 in Europe, and after the Moors were expelled from Italy and the shame of Sicily, and they tried to from there and Spain, they decided that after the Reconquista, they were like, yo man, we're gonna erase this and not even speak about it. Hence why, for some reason, you guys always hear about how we call from 1800 AD to 1580 or 1550 the Dark Ages. And no one explains why. They just tell you there's no literature there. Does that make any sense? We went from 800 AD when everything was cool, we had all this stuff written, then for 800 years, there's nothing written down, right? And we just end up with Parliament 1500s. It doesn't make any sense. But it does make sense. We realize that was when the Moors ruled. That was when they had all these different things that happened in Europe. If you go to Italy, they'll tell you it's they're people there are very upfront about their history. It's a known thing. Hence why when Italians came to America, they were considered mixed race N-words and all that other stuff because it was a known thing in all over the world that the Moors conquered them. The Moors ruled that place for a long, long time, right? So everything the other guy's saying, I concur with you. But like I said before, people need to do their own history. Even me, I went to public school like everyone else did. Public school didn't teach me anything. I didn't learn anything until I went to a real university, and there's nothing stopping parents from teaching their kids the truth history. Like I know I have Chinese friends or friends from or friends that are Pakistani or Arab. They don't let American people teach them their history. They teach their kids their history. They tell them what the situation is, where their family comes from. They make it a point every time they get together. Some person tells the kids, and this is what you are, is where you come from. Here's your family lineage. They keep artifacts. They pass it down. Hence why you'll see certain groups of people from other countries where they're very like, I can't do this. I have to be a doctor because I'm from this lineage or whatever, you know? And that's what people can or could do, is my view. But I concur with everything the other guy said prior.
All right, thank you. All right, thank you all for joining us. Please hit the like button if you've not already done so. Hit that notification bell so you get the updates from the Black Brain Trust, including those posted on the community tab. And for those who do celebrate it, enjoy your holiday. And shalom.